Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to RockeSpace, and more importantly, welcome to Rocket Studios, our very lean startup-esque event space. We took the space down a couple of weeks ago and told the landlord to do nothing, and we'll just take it as it is. And it is actually the mode that we built the whole company. And my name's Duncan Logan. I'm the founder of RockeSpace. Yeah, I'm really, really excited to have both Steve and Andre here, and welcome all of you to our event space.
Thanks a lot. Welcome everyone and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today for this exciting chat with Steve and Andre. My name is Martha Edith Hernandez, and I have the honor of working directly with the Innovation Core program. I won't tell you too much about it right now, because I'll spill the beans. I'll let Andre and Steve tell you all the juicy details. So before we get started, I wanted to introduce you to Andre Marquis. Andre is currently the Executive Director of the Lester Center for Entrepreneurship at the Hospital of Business at UC Berkeley. But there's more. He has a very long record of starting successful biotechnology and IT ventures, with a particular focus on winning in markets where scalability is critical. Who likes scalability? I know you do.
All right.
Two web companies Mr. Marquis helped start became publicly traded, and a third was acquired by Amazon for over $190 million. The Chorus Group at Eli Lilly, which he co-founded, is a significant model innovation that has dramatically speeded up the lowered and the cost of drug development. Sounds like a nicer entrepreneur to learn from, right? Now Andre is in charge of the Bay Area node for Innovation Core. The Bay Area node includes UC Berkeley, UCSF, and Stanford University. Now without further ado, help me welcome Mr. Andre Marquis.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha Edith. And Martha Edith works over in the Lester Center for Entrepreneurship in the business school at UC Berkeley. So I want to welcome Steve Blank. How many of you know about Steve? Thank you. I was going to say how many people know about me, but I know this is. But you know, Steve is obviously someone who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce you nonetheless.
Please don't.
Introduce you nonetheless.
That's long enough. Okay, let's go on.
One of the reasons I'm so excited is because you are leading a revolution, and I kid you not, it actually is a revolution, not only in how we create startups, but in how innovation is turned into impact and economic value by large organizations. I highly recommend that you sign up for his blog at steveblank.com right away. He's very good at summarizing what he learns as he goes. And, you know, welcome to RockeSpace.
Great, thank you.
Was that good?
That was long.
So how many of you have read one of Steve's books? Startup Owner's Manual. We have probably a half well-educated audience. How many of you have read some of the Eric Ries's books on the Lean Startup? Or know what the Lean Startup is?
Okay.
Oh, that's about half. This is going to be interesting today. So, what is customer development, Steve? What is the Lean Launchpad?
So I'm going to try to, maybe Andre, answer this for both of the audiences here, those who kind of been living the lean stuff, and for those of you who it's new. You know, the whole blah, blah, blah about my background, the most interesting thing is I screwed it up a lot over 21 years and got lucky and took some of them public. But most of the learning I did was actually out of the ones that failed. And when I retired, I actually had time to think about why did the failures happen. Everybody likes to think you're a genius about the successes, but the failures actually, if you could park the ego, actually you learn quite a bit. And what I learned, and I started writing about, was that the mistake we had made through the first 50 years of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley is thinking that startups were smaller versions of large companies. And that was just a big idea. I mean, it might seem intuitively obvious now that there's no way a startup is a large company. Large companies have different people, different processes, etc. But that's not in the 20th century how your investors told you to manage and operate your startups. Your investors back in the 20th century would say, hey, large companies write business plans, we want you to write a business plan. Large companies do income statements, balance sheet, and cash flow. We want you to do that, and if we give you money, we want you to execute per plan. And a startup was just thought about like a large company. Large companies execute their business models. And I'd say the big insight I had, probably maybe one of the few, was that not only weren't startups smaller versions of large companies, the distinction was that large companies execute known business models, but startups search for them. And this distinction between search and execution was really, really important, because we had spent the last 100 years making up tools and techniques and strategies for execution, mostly out of business schools and management consulting firms. But there was nobody who had built a body of knowledge for how you search for business model. All we had were war stories from entrepreneurs who would come in Berkeley and tell stories, and come into Stanford and tell you their life stories about what geniuses they are, and the press would celebrate, Jobs and, Henry Ford and, founder of Sony, but there was no methodology. There was no management stack for startups. Make a long story short is that I realized that we were just doing it wrong, is that we were assuming that on day one the founders actually understood the customer problem, and therefore all they needed to do was get smart people in a room, feed them Coke and the drinking kind, and sugar, and I won't tell you about the 80s in Silicon Valley, and then lock the door, and out came the solution sometime later, and that it was just simply a waterfall development process, and that was it. So I wrote a book, which at the time was pretty heretical, called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And it described a process that I thought was much more efficient of getting out of the building and actually testing your hypotheses. And that was a big idea, because I claimed what you had was nothing more than a series of untested hypotheses rather than facts on day one. And by the way, I used the word hypotheses because I was now teaching in universities, and my students were paying $50,000 a year to hear that word. Anybody know what the word hypotheses really means? Guesses, right? So if you really think about it as a founder, even though you might have been a domain expert, you were guessing about a lot of the assumptions critical to your startup. Product market fit, what features, the channel, pricing, competitors, etc. But you were executing like you knew what you were doing. And I just said, maybe we could shortcut some of that wasted time and motion and build a formal methodology, a process, that actually cut through all this stuff. And the first company we actually tested it in, I had funded and was on the board of, called IMVU. And one of the co-founders was one of the smarter guys I've ever run into, named Eric Ries. And Eric Ries said, Steve, this customer development process is great, but we need to pair it with a modern form of engineering. People no longer do waterfall in startups, they do agile engineering. And Eric was the first practitioner of customer development ever in the world, and actually put together a customer and agile development. And about 3 years later, the final piece of the Lean Startup came together when someone named Alexander Osterwalder wrote a book called Business Model Generation. Anybody read it? You should all have it on your desk, before Eric's book, before my book, before anybody. And what Osterwalder describes is something called the business model. And his big idea was, look, we've been talking about all these hypotheses, all these things we need to know. Well, in a startup, the only thing you used to be able to draw was the org chart, which was a description of functionally where you stood and what your job was. But Osterwalder's big idea was, well, before you could even draw the org chart, you should actually be trying to figure out, so who's the customer? What are you building for them? What's the channel? What's the revenue? Who are the partners, etc. And in fact, the business model canvas became the third piece of the Lean Startup. It allows you to frame and articulate all the hypotheses, all the guesses about your startup. And then you use customer development to get outside your building to test those hypotheses. And you use an agile engineering methodology to build the product incrementally and iteratively, testing it along with the other hypotheses. And so now we have the Lean Startup is these 3 pieces: business model design, customer development, agile engineering. And that's kind of like a pretty simple theoretical framework. The problem is that it was just a theoretical framework.
So, as far as I know, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of teams going through this methodology. So what does it mean in terms of what you actually do when
Right.
you go through NSF Innovation Core or you take a
Right.
Lean Launchpad class.
So here we have this great theory, and I'm now no longer a practitioner. I'm now a quote academic, and none of you are giggling. I giggle a lot, you know, because it used to be when you were building startups, you know, your comment, or at least my comment about people who taught is those who can't do, teach. And you know, now that some of us are, you know, now actually teaching, we no longer say that. But I was kind of curious of, okay, I got this great theory, and people would go, so now what do I do with the theory? And I go, isn't that Steve Jobs over there? And we'd change the subject. Until I finally realized that one of the other things that was massively broken was how we taught entrepreneurial education. It's a big idea. Anybody ever take a how to write a business plan class in some university? Right? I used to teach this for the first couple of years at Haas and then at Stanford.
We don't teach it anymore.
We don't teach it anymore, but that was, if you wanted to know how to become an entrepreneur, they would like say, oh, we're going to teach you how to write a business plan and then do the VC PowerPoint slides. Without realizing that the VC PowerPoint slides are essentially the summary of your business plan. And writing the business plan was just, I'm now convinced that business plan writing probably still should be taught in major universities, except it ought to be taught in the English department, because it's the best example of creative writing that you could probably ever do. But it doesn't belong in any entrepreneurial courses. But it was easy to criticize, but a lot harder to say what was missing. And so what I decided to attack was what was missing between this disconnect of what we were teaching in schools versus what, as a practitioner, I knew what was going on in the real world. And what I realized is entrepreneurship is experiential, right? It's, in fact, I use this analogy a lot, and how many of you are founders of a company here? Okay, or want to be founders, or, you know, kind of dreaming about, all right, I'm going to tell you good news and bad news. For those of you who are engineers, or business people, or finance people, the minute you raised your hand, you just dropped out of that job. You actually just became an artist. And it's a big idea, is that founders are closer to artists than any other profession in the world. Because founders, true founders, see something that other people don't. They hear things that other people don't. And they feel things. And in fact, the goal of a founder is to bring something inside of them that few other people could see to fruition against all odds and all obstacles. And we've, interestingly enough, actually know how to teach artists. We've learned how to do that for 500 years since the Renaissance. You know, people don't question, can you teach artists? Of course you can. People ask the question, can you teach entrepreneurship? But we've never questioned, can you teach artists? And what we know how to teach art is experiential. There's a basic grounding you need in theory, whether it's in music theory or art theory or, you know, sculpting theory. But then it's like a couple of years of getting your teeth kicked in by like hands-on, dirty, you know, like just practice and work. Yet we were teaching entrepreneurship like it was accounting. But no one ever noticed that accountants don't run startups. Apologies to any accountants in the room, but it's time to leave. But no one's going, okay, good. But if you really think about it, what we were missing was any type of entrepreneurial experience in a formal university setting that was hands-on. And again, the thing I would get from business schools, not at Berkeley, not at Stanford, but in other schools is, oh, we're not a trade school, we don't do that. And then you kind of go, doesn't your medical school make a surgeon's practice before they actually go out? I mean, well, yeah, but not in business, or, you know, and you kind of went, this is just broken. So make a long story short, we decided to put together an entrepreneurial course that never existed before in any form. And we called it the Lean Launchpad. And what it was just theory, very thinly, but 10 weeks of the most intense practice you could ever imagine. And we taught this class at a prototype in a school south of Berkeley that starts with an S that clearly isn't as good as Berkeley. But we taught it there first in the engineering school. And because I open source everything I do now as an educator, I blogged about the class. I blogged not just a summary of the class, I live blogged every class session, thinking, well, if this craters, everybody should know, and if this succeeds, I want to share it with other educators. And even my co-author of my last book said, Steve, even I can't read this anymore. This is the most boring thing. You know, why don't you stop blogging the sessions? I said, no, let me just finish it. Maybe there's somebody reading it. So I'm going to answer your question. It turns out that in Washington, D.C., there were 25 guys and women in a federal research organization called the National Science Foundation that was reading every blog. And I finally, 6 weeks after I finished the class, driving on the Stanford campus, get a phone call that goes like this. Hi, is this Steve Blank? Yes. You know, how can I help you? Steve, we're from the US government, we need your help. And because even at this age, I'm still a smartass, I said, screw you guys, the government got my help during Vietnam for 4 years, you're not getting it again. And you could just hear it, like Errol said, he's like, who the hell are we talking to? And he said, no, we're from the National Science Foundation. And I don't say this too often, but I honestly did say, what's the National Science Foundation? Like, aren't you an academic? And it turns out, for those of you who don't know, the US government, since World War II, which was new starting in World War II, massively funds science and engineering in our universities. And the National Science Foundation is the dedicated federal agency that spends $7 billion a year funding scientists and engineers for all research except for medical and life sciences in the US. So you're a professor or you're a grad student, the odds are you're getting some kind of NSF grant. And about 30 years ago, the US Congress said, not only to the NSF, but every federal research organization, that if anybody who gets a grant from the government raises their hand and says they want to turn that science into a company, we need to have saved 3% of our budget to fund these guys or women. And that's called the SBIR program. And the guy who was calling me was the head of the SBIR program, who said, listen, we've been doing this for 30 years, and thank God Congress isn't asking how well we're doing. And I said, well, how well are you doing? He said, don't ask. I said, well, why are you calling me? He said, look, we've tried everything to teach scientists who want to commercialize their science and who have great ideas how to be company CEOs. And you know, some ideas were teach them how to be MBAs, or teach them how to write business plans, or teach them how to whatever. I said, yeah, why are you calling me? He said, well, we just read your stuff. It looks like in your class, you've just invented the scientific method for entrepreneurship. I said, gee, I never even said that, and I'm a marketeer, I'd say anything. I said, why would you say that? And he said, well, the core of what you're teaching is how to get people outside the building and set up experiments to test hypotheses. That's what customer discovery essentially is. It's about hypothesis testing. It's in fact setting up every assumption you think you know on day one, who my customer is, what my channel is, what my pricing is. Just setting it up is, instead of I know, saying I think I know, but it's a hypothesis. So let's figure out how to quickly test it. And he said, we think this could actually accelerate how we commercialize technology in the United States. And so we basically set up a class for them within 90 days, got a bunch of venture capital friends to co-teach it with me, and the results were pretty astonishing. They gave us 25 teams, tenured professors, a postdoc, and a local mentor, and for the first time, we were forcing professors who had never left their university to get out of the building, and had been out since like their PhD orals. In fact, I don't even think they knew the way home, you know, without some, and they were being yelled at by us, which was great. I mean, it's like, yeah, bullshit, that's not a, you know, a customer segment, and they're like, and it was wonderful. Because the amount of learning that went on, in fact, this is what the NSF concluded at the end of the first class, we got them to do things in 10 weeks that the NSF couldn't get them to do in 3 years. And they decided that this program was worth scaling, and we scaled this first prototype class into something called the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps. And it's now being taught at multiple universities, including Berkeley, this Berkeley node which Andre heads, and in multiple 10, 15 nodes?
15 universities.
15 universities across the United States, and over 300 teams have been through this process. This fall, the National Institute of Health is going to adopt the same process, and probably at the same time the Department of Energy is as well. The class is also taught at, I don't know, 100 universities throughout the world now, because we also teach 75 educators a quarter on how to teach this process.
I'm a serial entrepreneur as well, and I am a disciple. And one thing that I find interesting is how much you're doing science, you're doing healthcare. We're actually using a similar program. We're doing a wearable device accelerator for Intel, so it's kind of a corporate innovation play. And I think I'm wondering about what you think about the connection. So a lot of the scale has come in academia, but what do you think about entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley, and what can they kind of take advantage of to get on the bus if they're not at a major university or they're not on a on a university campus or a National Science Foundation?
So I think it's bayicorps.com. Here's the URL. It turns out the same process that we teach for the government and in Stanford and Berkeley is now offered to all of you as part of this I-Corps program that starts in June. And that it simply works as you apply as a team by the 14th of May, right? At bayicorps.com. And you could go through the same process. Now the question is, I think you're asking is, why should I want to do this?
Exactly.
Right?
That was exactly the question.
Hey, I'm busy building my product. Get the hell out of the way. And the only reason is, how many of you have done a startup and failed? Right? You're the ones who will get it immediately, right? And you could explain it to everybody else. Right? One of the great things about being a founder of a company is that you're too dumb to know it can't be done, right? Or else you would never do it. I mean, to be honest, some of you are laughing, the rest of you think you've been insulted. Not really. I mean, it turns out the odds are terribly low that you're going to succeed. But you do it because you're passionately driven to bring your idea to fruition. This Lean Launchpad process reduces early stage mortality. We now know this. We have facts that actually say that if you go through this process, and again, it's not like, we're going to make your idea better. We're just going to turn every one of your guesses into either yes or no, as probably more efficiently than anything you could do. And so what it does is reduce wasted time and, more importantly, money that you're going to spend in validating your initial ideas. And so think of this as kind of a risk reduction technology for early stage ventures. And that's the best way to think about it. And the good news is now, after about hundreds of teams, it's kind of a proven methodology. Again, we don't guarantee you're going to be Facebook or Twitter, but we do guarantee that you actually get more shots at the goal because you will still be around longer because we've made you efficient on how to test some of your initial hypotheses.
Now, one of the things I think is most interesting about the program is in a 7-week program, the teams have to go out and do 100 customer interviews.
Yep.
I heard a couple gasps in the audience. Why 100?
Because it was an even number. so it's turned into religion. It's my experience is you tell people you need to get out of the building and validate something, and they'll talk to 2 or 3 people and come back and say, got it. And for those of you who know, I mean, that's really not validation. That's kind of like, I don't know, getting an answer you want. What you really want to do is get enough data that the matrix is not sparse, that it's dense enough in each one of those boxes, whether it's getting data about channel, or getting data about product market fit, or getting data about demand creation or customer acquisition. And it just seemed to me that 10 is too sparse and 20 and whatever, and by the time we were getting to 100, you were starting to get some repeatable signals out of noise. And what you're essentially looking for is signals out of that early customer discovery noise. Remember, what this process is not a giant focus group. It's a big idea. We're not having you get out of the building and ask people about their opinions. We're actually trying to inform the founder's vision. That's a much bigger idea. We're thinking that you do have a vision. We don't want you to change that vision. We just want you to figure out whether you're a visionary or you're actually hallucinating. And the odds are 95% of the time you're on drugs. And most of the time when that happens, you run out of money and you crash and burn. So what we're trying to do is, in fact, help you inform that vision as rapidly as possible, giving you more facts, allowing you to say, in fact, I've had startups come back and say, everybody hates the idea, let us tell you why we're still going forward. And you know what? That could be a valid direction, but now you have some data that says, let me tell you why I'm going to ignore this segment or this feedback. Most often than not, is that if you're a founder kind of attuned to this discovery process, you'll be asking questions about, like, so what else should I have asked you? And in those questions, you'll be getting like answers that will blow you away, that might actually have you iterate or pivot. And by the way, how many of you have heard the word pivot? Now, I'm going to give you a concrete definition, which you might not have heard before. In the Lean Launchpad parlance, a pivot is a substantive change to one or more of the business model canvas components, right? So if you think you're framing your hypotheses by who the customers, what's my product, what's the channel, etc. A pivot is you've gotten some data that says your initial hypothesis may be incorrect and requires some substantive change. And by the way, the other thing we teach you is that a pivot is not an excuse for attention deficit disorder. Only some of you over there are laughing. I don't know. Should I just say it again over here? A pivot is not like I've heard two people tell me that this is a bad idea, which is why you're talking to a large number of people. It's you've now heard consistently, because the minute you pivot, you're making a major shift in your engineering group, and you're affecting a lot of people's lives, and you want to make sure you're correct. Did I answer your question?
You did. Now, one of the things I find interesting is you developed, you wrote 4 Steps to the Epiphany while you were teaching MBA students at Berkeley.
Yeah.
And then you went down to Stanford and taught in the engineering school, which was all engineers.
Yep.
And now with the National Science Foundation, what you do at Berkeley, it's mixed.
Yep.
So why? What do you get if you're all business, you're all,
Well, when it's mixed, you kind of are getting a better representation of what startups look like. I mean, startups have a combination of business people and engineers, and some startups are started by engineering people, some by business people, some by both. Every startup I've been in, I was kind of the semi-business guy, but always did it with a much smarter engineering partner, and having everybody aligned to what the process is. The most frustrating part when I actually was inventing customer development in my last startup was, engineering was patting me on the head and going, well, that's nice, but we're too busy doing waterfall engineering, come back when we release the next product. And what you really want is everybody kind of in sync. And you can't do this if the founders don't agree on the process.
So the other thing about the other question I had about the class is I've noticed you do it as a flipped classroom, and so you can actually see all of Steve's lectures on the Lean Launchpad if you go to Udacity. So if you just type Steve blank Udacity, or you can find it on Steve's blog, steveblank.com. You can go and see all the lectures, and which is really interesting. So what do they get extra in the classroom besides what appears to be an ass kicking every week?
Right. So let me explain the classroom framework or what the class is about. Basically, you apply as a team. You're vetted not only just on the idea, but whether the team is passionate and committed, because what's really interesting is that the odds are your initial idea is not going to be your final idea. And that's kind of really interesting. When we used to teach the how to write a business plan class, we always used to take the best, big idea. Right. And what we now know is we're assuming that you're going to pivot, and therefore you might end up with something quite different. But in any case, you get in the class, starting on day 1, you're presenting. In fact, you present in front of the classroom every week. You and your team, here's day 1, here's our business model. Great. We give you, we make you watch the videos, we give you some additional lecture, and then that week you have to go out and talk to 10 to 15 customers. And you're trying to validate one portion of that business model canvas. Let's say the first week is, what's the value proposition? Fancy word for what are you building? Next week, what's the customer segment? And then you come back in the class and you present again to the teaching team and your peers. Here's what we found. And the teaching team gives you a critique, which is a polite way to say, really, that's what you found, really, is that what, and basically helps you understand as you're not only getting feedback, but watching everybody else get feedback on each portion of your business model canvas. So every week you're presenting, getting out of the building, learning a new part about what you need to be discovering, and then every week coming back and iterating in the classroom.
Well, I have to say, when I first saw your class 3 years ago, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, the thing that actually blew my mind, so it was teams up in front of the room, every team has to get up every week and present what they learned, and you've got VCs, very experienced VCs and entrepreneurs at the back of the classroom, throwing in bombs, disagreeing with things, entrepreneurs disagreeing with the person who just disagreed with them in a really, really interesting dialogue, but what's interesting is that it actually felt like what it was like to be an entrepreneur, to be having a discussion with your investors. They think one thing, you think another thing. Why did that dynamic come up in the classroom?
Right. So if you remember the original comment about we were never teaching anything that actually modeled the real world. What I wanted was a classroom experience that actually modeled what it was like to do a startup. And to give students some honest feedback of what it would feel like in a board meeting. Except for the first time, have you armed with some facts that your investors don't have. That is, you know, every investor always has an opinion, or else I guess you can't get your official investor card. But the best way for an entrepreneur to, quote, win an argument, not the goal is to win, but to actually have a valid conversation, is to say, well, that's an interesting opinion. But let me tell you what my last 35 customers said. Whoa, that was, I see you 1 and I raise you 5. And that's what we're looking for in the classroom is, you know, Steve, thanks for your opinion about who we should be talking to, but here's what these guys said, and by the way, I just got a conditional purchase order. Well, okay, yeah, I'll give you a pass.
And what's the biggest purchase order anyone has gotten in your class?
Yeah, so one of the standard jokes about our class is that if you don't talk to 10 customers that week, you don't get to present. And if you don't present 2 weeks in a row, you're no longer in the class. It's pretty Darwinian. And my students know this, and in one of the Berkeley classes, one of them stands up and said, we only spoke to 1 customer. And they said, before you throw us out, we want to show you the 1 slide from this 1 customer. Okay, what is it? It was a check from Safeway for $650,000. It was a startup called Crave. Anybody see Crave, the beef jerky company, right? So they started in our class. And I said, you know, that's the only excuse from now on. That anyone, and it's not, again, we're not, the key idea, and I don't mean this as a diss, but just as a differentiation, the class isn't an incubator. Our goal at the end isn't to get you funded. Our goal is to enrich how much you know. So in fact, our final presentations are not called demo days, they're called the lessons learned day. And what we want is a summary for you to present. What did you learn about your business model from, tell us what happened on day 1, when did you pivot, how did your canvas change, how did you learn this, and where are you now? Now, if any of you have done a demo day, it's basically, you know, how loud can our voice be, and, you know, how many adjectives can we use, and how much can we tell you that we're geniuses, and you're going to be even smarter by investing in us. I call that, you know, startups walking around in bathing suits in a beauty contest. It really doesn't tell us what you learned as being entrepreneurs. The Lean Launchpad class, it's pretty clear what you learned because we force you to tell us about where did you start and how did you learn all this stuff. Just as an aside, world-class entrepreneurs are awesome at reinventing the past. I mean, you'll always say, you know, after you figured it out, oh, I knew that from day 1. I now have a couple of 100 teams who can't do that because I have their day 1 slides. But almost everybody will reinvent, you know, like, oh, I knew that from day 1.
You know, we're here in Silicon Valley, and we always hear about the, you know, the legend of Steve Jobs. And, you know, he never talked to customers, and, you know, he just had this perfect vision of the future. And I just wonder what you think about that.
You know, so what I think about is PR people have probably done the biggest disservice to entrepreneurship ever, because that's actually not what Steve Jobs did. I mean, Apple's PR people, when he was alive, would have loved you to think he was sitting in a lead-lined room in a Zen Lotus position with lightning bolts coming out of his head. And therefore, that's where ideas came from. So number 1, you've got to hand it to Jobs. He probably was the best 21st century intersection of art and science and technology that one had. So let's give him for what it was due. But it wasn't like he never got out of the building. You know, when I think it was the 2nd or 3rd Apple store opened in Palo Alto, he lived about a mile from it in one direction, I lived a mile from another. And I would wander down downtown University Avenue, and I'd see Jobs in there, you know, the first month it opened, maybe every other day. And no one from the press ever wrote anything about this, because I wondered, Steve Jobs, is he in this store because, like, he can't get a Mac delivered to his house? You know? But he was just kind of standing there and just watching. And, you know, Like, what do you think he was doing? You know, waiting for his credit card to clear? I mean, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't that the guy, and my best friend, John Rubinstein, was his head of hardware engineering for 13 years. And, you know, Jobs knew about every component that, you know, Ruby had looked at in China and Japan. I mean, he was on top of all this stuff. Now, he had world-class pattern recognition, but it wasn't like this guy was just sitting here in a vacuum. Number two is, what Jobs did, at least with the iPod, iPhone, and iPad, was invent something called new markets. And this idea of market type for entrepreneurs is completely overlooked. And it starts with some of the work that Clayton Christensen did about sustaining and disruptive innovation. But it turns out there are 4 types of startups. And when you leave here today, you ought to think about who you are. First type of startup is you're entering an existing market. How do we know it's an existing market? Any idea? Well, there's customers. What else are there in an existing market? Competitors. Great. What can the market tell you? What can they tell you? You get out to customer discovery. What can they tell you? Preferences, features, pricing, everything. They can tell you everything. You can learn a ton of customer discovery. And in fact, my definition of an existing market, you're entering with a higher performance product. And by the way, what's the axis of performance? They'll tell you, whether it's speed or service or something else. There could be another type of startup where the market exists, but the incumbents are so strong, attacking them head on with a higher performance product is suicidal. But you think that's a big enough market, you might want a piece of it. Well, there's 2 ways to approach an existing market that way. Is you could either find a niche, a set of users that need something you have discovered because you understand them well enough, or you could get the product made in China and make a low-cost version and deliver 80% of the features for 20% of the price. That's taking a segment of an existing market. So that's type 2. The third type is what Jobs was great at, and that's creating a new market. What do we know about new markets? Nothing. Right. Unknown customers, unknown pricing, unknown competitors. All we have is a vision. All we have is a vision. And again, we're either visionaries or we're hallucinating. And some people are really good at new market visions. Jobs was probably as good as it got. As good as it got. But what do we know about launching a product in an existing market? What can we get the day we launch? What can we get? Yeah, what kind of feedback? We just launched the product. What can we get? Sales, right? Immediately. And by the way, if we're right in an existing market, our revenue curve looks like this. We're taking share from the incumbents. Okay, we're now in a new market. All right, I just launched the product. What do I got on day 1? Nothing. Year 2, what do I got? Probably nothing. Year 3, maybe. And in fact, the sales curve in a new market is the canonical hockey stick. And unfortunately, for most startups, you spend all your money launching in a new market, just like you were in an existing market, you run out of cash way before that hockey stick ever appears. Does that make sense? Asking yourself, wait a minute, am I like creating something new and all this other stuff has to happen? Or can I take share from existing customers right now? There's a 4th type of market outside the US, that's a clone market, where you adapt and you adopt working business models in the US for local countries like China or India or Russia, and adapt and adopt is a more polite word of you steal the hell out of them and then you implement them. And by the way, it's a valid business. I mean, there's nothing where you're not stealing code, hopefully, but you're taking a proven business model and making sure it will work in your country. Great business. And so those are the 4 types of startups you need to be asking yourself. And again, Jobs was great at the new market stuff. And the questions you ask in customer discovery are very different depending on market type, right? Asking people about features in a new market is ludicrous. Not asking people about features in an existing market is criminal, right? All right, did I answer?
That's perfect.
Let's get some
Last
questions
question.
from these guys.
Hello? Hi, Steve. First off, thank you very much for coming and speaking with us. My question to you is, in the classes that you teach and when you work with scientists, for the scientists that were working on very technical devices, whether medical devices or, I guess, technology software, what was the one general trend that they often overlooked until the last maybe week once it really sinked in that this is something that they've completely missed, but they know what their target audience, their target customers might have wanted or do want. They know
It's a great question. In fact, the last big scientist class I personally taught were 20 some odd teams at UCSF, where the head of surgery of UCSF was heading up one. The inventor of fetal surgery was heading up another team. 2 teams were sneaking out at night from Genentech. It was, there was an example class. And even the head of surgery who had been working on this product for 2 years said, Steve, I'm just taking this class so I could train my other, doctors on this stuff. I know exactly how the other surgeons are going to. And of course, week 2, they stand up and we have a famous video of this saved us years. Well, what happened? Well, essentially, the surgeons didn't agree with what he thought the benefits were. He thought it was going to be a cheaper way to close, tubes inside your body, and it turns out that was not the motivation for any of his potential customers. The motivation was leakage rates. And almost always scientists think it's a cost-based savings thing, and it turns out that the reason for adoption is almost always more complex than just cost. So that's probably the biggest one for scientists. Oh, I have something cheaper. And it turns out as you get to know an application area, it turns out that's almost never the motivation. Not never, but almost never. Did I answer your question?
Actually, if I can add to that one, the quote from the video is, we went out and talked to 14 surgeons, and they said they wouldn't pay even $1,000 for what we want to sell them. But there's this other application that we could do, and they say they'd pay us $20,000 for that. And that was...
Same device.
Same device.
Really. Next question.
I'm a software engineer, more specifically mobile developer, and very new to lean startup and marketing and sales in general. My question is, if I'm building an app, let's say, or a project, should I focus, like, the 2 sides of the coin I've seen is like people make apps or their products free, and then they get a lot of users, or you just start charging from the day one, like, what do I do? Which one is the right way?
Yes. So that's why you take the class. No, I'm not being facetious. And by the way, anybody who tries to give you an answer, I'd run away fast. So the question truly is, there's a lot of implicit, what app, how crowded, what's the niche, what's the platform, how do you want to monetize, do you want to flip the company, do you want to, grow it to something useful, is this a small business or lifestyle business, do you want to build a scalable startups? All sets of questions that you first got to answer for yourself and your co-founders way before we could then say, okay, and then for every niche, if you were building an app that we're going after, let's say, surgeons, you only need 100,000 of them to be able to monetize something interesting. Oh, you're going after general users? Don't talk to a VC until you got 10 million users. So now tell me which business you're in. And so these require something other than glib answers. Does that make sense? And if you take the class, you will get that kind of feedback from us and mentors in longer sentences.
My question is, there's 9 different areas in the business model. Do you only interview customers?
No.
Or
no, you march through every one of the boxes.
So it counts when you interview a
yeah, so the
partner?
100 customers actually should say 100 customers, channel partners, like payers for ads, clinical research organizations for partners, etc. Does that answer your question? Yes. Yeah. And now, by the way, if you're doing a web mobile app, talking to 100 is probably a factor of 10 too low, and you need to supplement that with, additional survey data because you can't eyeball that many. But does that answer your question? Yeah. Next.
2 quick questions. One, hi, I'm Donna. One practical, one sort of more philosophical. So the practical one is, when do you recommend taking the class? Like, where are you in the life cycle of your idea? Is the right time to take the class?
Sure.
And then the second is, what are your guys' feelings on why there are so few women in this room?
So in terms of when to take the class, it's if you are willing to pivot. If you are willing, that really what it comes down to. If you're locked in to whatever you're doing and you're not open to change and you think it's going great, then you
don't take the class.
then don't take the class. But if you're in there to learn, and one of the things that's interesting is not only do we see new teams doing new things, but we see people who've taken a run at it and not really gotten to where they wanted to go, come back in and re-examine fundamentally kind of what they're doing as a business. But you have to be open to learning and you have to be open to pivoting.
You know, your idea might change, but the team needs to be committed that we want to work our butts off. This is not you sit in the class and take notes. And so where I've seen this break down, at least in classroom, not in the NSF program, but in classroom, is different motivations from different team members where they go, this is too hard, why am I doing this? And you have said, well, wait a minute, I'm learning a ton. That's when it's probably, you should have picked the right team for the right motivation, less so the right product. Make sense? All right, next question.
Steve,
Actually, we didn't, do you want to, I'm not sure I can, okay, good, all right.
Above my pay grade, sorry.
Steve, a question here. So it might be kind of like a follow-up to this one, but basically, if there's someone that has an idea and has been thinking about it quite a bit and has developed some level of business plan and mock-ups and so on, but doesn't have a team yet.
Don't take the class. There, you can't get into the class.
Okay.
All right. So I just believe that that's practice for you trying to find. This is just me, and it's my shtick. We could argue some other time whether it's right or not wrong. But a startup with one person, one founder, is like one hand clapping. It at least it doesn't let you participate in the process that the class is designed for, which is hypothesis testing and iterating, which actually is a polite way to say you and your co-founders are going to be arguing a lot, right? And or else you're going to be stopped on the street for yelling at yourself because it doesn't work, right? And it doesn't mean you have a bad idea, and it's not a judgment about. But the class is organized to have a series of peers, at least for the purpose of this class. Next.
Over here. Hi. Thank you for answering my question. My question is, would the class be appropriate for more of a social organization where your users might be different from your customers? And I'm particularly interested in ideas that would be a non-traditional approach for foundations.
Let me answer the first part and then I'll let you do the social part. So you just said something important, which is the users are not the customers. In, I'd say, at least 3/4 of the startups, there are what's called a multi-sided market. That is, there might be users, there might be payers, there might be 14 other people. So just understand when you said that, I just want everybody else to know that, for example, Google's a multi-sided market, right? The users of Google search are not the payers. Now, the specific part of your question is, does this work for social?
I'm happy, this is actually a question I'm interested in because at the Leicester Center for Entrepreneurship, we run the Global Social Venture Competition, and a big component of what we do is focused on social ventures. Now, to me, Steve's definition of a startup, which is, it's a temporary organization looking for a repeatable and scalable business model. So getting to scale is, to me, a really important component of the class. Also, it is honestly focused around, in a certain sense, trying to make economic profits. Now, what you choose as a venture to do with your economic profits, whether you pay them back to shareholders as dividends, or return them to sell the company, return to investors, or plow it back into doing more social good, is up to the founders. But I think if you're trying to be an organization that's trying to find a repeatable and scalable model, and that has a mission and a social component, it's completely appropriate. But just recognize that the form of the class is really focused around finding that repeatable and scalable model and getting customers to pay. And if you can build extra impact on top of that, that's a bonus. I don't know, do you think that characterized it, Steve?
Sure. The bigger problem for social ventures is figuring out what the right metrics are that you're measuring, right? In a startup, it's pretty, for a for-profit startup, the metrics are the gun to your head, which are either number of users for scale or number of revenue before I run out of cash, etc. In a social venture, at least a traditional one, you've got to factor in donors' intent and funding. I mean, I don't understand how to do that with the same level of prediction as you could do for a for-profit. But it turns out that we've had some great nonprofits. Tidepool was the one at UCSF, which I almost didn't let in the class, and they were spectacular. So the answer is up to Andre, I guess, is the
And actually, we're launching a social version of this Lean Launchpad class in the fall at UC Berkeley, but it's brand new, and we're gonna see how it goes. But we're trying to put those two, the mission together with the scalable business model together, but it's a new thing. So,
Next question.
I'll talk to you.
Quick, while she's walking.
So two questions for you. One, when you're also in the process of
You
building,
get one. What's the question?
when you're building the company as well, you're building the product, can you still be in the class, or is it prior to actually building anything?
No. So one of the things in the class is that you're building the product. And if you're not prepared to build MVPs in the class, don't sign up. This is not some get out of the building and we're talking about theory. If you're building a web mobile app, you're building the web mobile app. If you're building hardware, you're building some kind of prototype that you could actually take out of the building. So this is not some theoretical paper exercise. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Next. How about right there?
A question about qualitative data gathering. I think one thing that our team has had a really hard time with is going to customer interviews, doing street intercepts, talking to users, and bringing back that anecdotal evidence in a meaningful and actionable way. Do you have any sort of, not necessarily tips, but sort of best practices
Sure. And
around
so you didn't tell me you were setting up experiments. These seem like conversations.
No, so I mean, they're generally, I think we've had an easier time with more formal, hour-long conversations and setting up tests. But especially when we're going to test things, we're developing a mobile app, and especially when we do things like testing features, people's first reactions to certain aspects of our product, having a hard time sort of bringing that back.
Perfect reason to take the class. Next.
we have time for one more question here.
Who has the best question? Who has the best? You pick. Who has the best question?
Right there. Right there. You'll have a chance to ask more people questions. Don't worry.
Yeah. I would like to know your opinion about how valuable is this course for international startup, because like the market fit in USA is something that you can find and you can enter in the market way faster than in other markets. Even like Europe or like South America, Asia, I feel a lot of startups that are trying to find the market fit, but the customer react in very different ways. So what do you think about it?
Yeah, don't take the class here. I mean, you can take the class here to learn the process. One of the things I've learned in the Stanford and Berkeley classes is kind of the opposite of people who wanted to start the company here, but their customers were going to be overseas. You can't do customer discovery by proxy. You could learn the process, but either you're going to be talking to Americans, which, as you point out, won't be valid data, or you're going to be trying to do this via Skype and won't be whatever, and not have any cross-correlation between Skype and eyeball time. And it makes it not impossible, just makes it difficult. But if you have interest, I would say apply, let Andre and you have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I will add on top of that is in the past year, we've taught versions of the class in, I think, 20 countries, everywhere from Saudi Arabia, China, India, Kenya, Jordan, Tunisia. I could go on. But the thing that is interesting about it is this notion of getting out of the building, looking for a scalable business model, talking to customers is something that is universal.
Right.
And
So
does work internationally.
the one
which is a
place
different
that
question.
I never thought it would work is Japan. Right? Like, oh, who's going to talk to in Japan? Turns out there's a whole customer development process and team, not only being taught in Japanese universities, but the equivalent of the NSF in Japan. Most and some other national organizations have just adopted it there. And so that's kind of exciting.
So,
what do we do next?
So we're going to be around. We have two faculty members from our innovation core here.
Raise your hand.
Stephanie, actually stand up and turn around so people can ask you questions. So Stephanie Maris, who runs the Entrepreneurship Center at UCSF. Oh, Kira as well. Oh,
We have one more.
Ron. I didn't know you were Ron Lesniak from the engineering school at UC Berkeley. Martha Edith, raise your hand. So Martha Edith is the program manager for our node, and Nancy Kimay, who's at UCSF and is a come out faculty at UC Berkeley as well. So if you have questions about the program, these are people you can come ask and get more in-depth answers. I want to thank RockeSpace for hosting us.